Yes, all right. Hello, everyone. Now we're live. It is our second attempt to start this live stream. First time we started and it didn't go on YouTube, so we were broadcasting to other streams. Uh, sorry, okay, that's me trying to figure out if it goes live on YouTube or not. Um, well, hello, everyone, again. Um, I'm here today with Alicia from the sunny province of Alberta, the city of Calgary. We were just talking about how crazy things are, and we started talking about the job offer points. So for those who just tune in and don't realize like what's going on, why it started so abruptly without any shoutouts, is because we had some technical issues. It looks like now we have more people piling in. So send us comments in the comment section. Let us know where you tune in from. Are you watching us on YouTube or on any other platform? And while we wait for people to pile in, Alicia, let's start all over again. How are you doing? What are the things that we would want to discuss during this live stream today?
We're doing a take two. So take
Yes.
two, here we go. All right. So we're going to talk about what's going on. And I see a few comments about what's happening with the election results, what's happening with geopolitical issues, what's happening with finances as well. And this is a super big concern for everybody who's sitting there who's watched, the last 8 years of savings just disappear. Um, or if you have savings. Otherwise, now people are looking at what to do with debt, right? Which is super, super difficult. So, election. We know Canada's in the process of an election. That election campaign is ongoing from all parties. We do have an election taking place on April 28th. So, it's coming up soon. It's this month. And we may or may not have a different government. We may have a different immigration minister. A lot of things remain to be seen. And so we have heard from the Conservatives and from Polyev that he might tie immigration to the last year's housing numbers. And so, most of the parties haven't come out with an official platform on immigration or a stance on immigration, but that's one thing that's been kind of bandied about. Um, I saw an article where some people were saying, well, hey, a lot of the immigrants or a lot of the people who are here as temporary foreign workers or students already have housing. So that might not be the most logical correlation. Um, but for sure, we know that immigration is going to be talked about in the election at some point. So far, it's largely been about what to do with the US, what to do about global financial meltdowns that are happening right now. So there's a lot going on. From an immigration standpoint, we do know that many people are still waiting for Express Entry. There were a bunch of changes with Express Entry because they took away job offer points. And maybe, Igor, you might want to show people on our blog the article that you wrote about kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly about job offers and the fact that those CRS, the 50 points or the 200 points, if you happen to be in a 00 knock, they're just gone, or they will be gone. If they're still showing in your profile, let us know. I'd be interested if anybody can still see job offer points in their profile. Maybe stick that into the chat. But otherwise, Igor's written an article about, those job offer points, why they were important, what kind of job offers received them. You had to have an employer specific, so a closed work permit. Those were the only circumstances where a job offer was possible. It was either LMIA based or employer specific under the IMP program. Um, the problem was, of course, we know that there was fraud in terms of people who were bad actors who were abusing the system with LMIAs. And unfortunately, instead of trying to crack down on bad actors, immigration just said, you know what, we're going to completely erase points, and not only for LMIA based job offers, but also for all job offers. So anybody who's here on an intercompany transfer, anybody who's here under a free trade agreement, anybody who has like a closed work permit with a specific employer, too bad, those points are gone. And it's interesting though, because that will have a disproportionate effect. And this is where Igor gets into, you know, who do you think loses here, Igor?
I think, well, first of all, it's the people who are of the older age
Mhm.
because they have experience and they've been invited to come to Canada to take executive positions to help our company succeed in a global market. And typically, those people would come here under international mobility program um, on LMA exempt work permits, um, just because of their experience and their significant benefit that they can provide to Canada, um, compared to people who obtained LMIAs or paid to get the LMIAs. Um, they they were just genuine actors essentially, and depriving them of 50 points would place them in a very bad position because they would not be as competitive compared to other candidates who are young, who have studied here in Canada, or
Yeah.
who just happen to have an LMA.
Mhm. Absolutely. And so that's what I've been seeing as well with executives or people who are managers or people who've been working for a Canadian company for 1 year or 2 years who thought, okay, well, my family and I have a pathway to PR, and now all of a sudden they don't. They probably don't. So I guess what we can do is also flip over to the CRS rounds of invitations
And Alicia,
and just,
before we do that, I also wanted to take everyone to your blog post that you drafted some long time ago. It was, I think, September 4th last year, where you talked about the job offer points and how they affect your express entry application. So this blog post has been updated. So make sure you go to our website, search for this blog post. All you need to do is go to our blog and just type job offer points in here, and it will take you to both articles.
yeah. And Igor, maybe I can spend a few minutes on this because I literally spent like most of the day on Monday rewriting this article. Um, because it's super important. And the reason that it's super important is I do a deep dive into the regulations and to the ministerial instructions. And so job offers are talked about a lot in express entry and also in the provincial nominee programs and in the Atlantic immigration program. And when they say job offer, they are very specifically relating that terminology to different sections of the regulations and the ministerial instructions. And you will notice if you go into your express entry profile that it still has all these questions about do you have a job offer? And most people fill the section out incorrectly because they don't understand what the questions are asking. And it is a really important thing to make sure that you're answering this truthfully and correctly because whether or not you have valid job offer points, even once they've taken away those CRS points, affects your federal skilled worker selection grid categories. So there are still points for job offers in kind of getting your foot in the door in having a valid profile for federal skilled worker at all. And so if you don't have Canadian experience, federal skilled worker is huge. It's really, really important. And what happens is those job offer points, actually arranged employment points, give you 10 points for arranged employment, but then there's also the adaptability section. So we know that there's a 67-point pass mark out of a possible 100 points on the selection grid. And the job offer or arranged employment points are 10, but then there are also another 5 points out of a maximum of 10 in the adaptability factors. So it's literally 15 points out of those 67 pass mark that relate back to arranged employment. And there are very specific circumstances where you can claim arranged employment. It's only if you're going to be having an LMIA or another employer specific work permit that is in the IMP, the International Mobility Program. So take a look at this. It's super important. The other thing that I noticed when I was going through the regulations in detail is that it also affects the federal skilled trade category. So even if you were trying to look at federal skilled trades, there are two eligibility parameters. One is whether you have arranged employment, and the other is do you have a certificate of qualification? Take a look. Mark and I did a whole podcast on certificates of qualification, and so many people get this wrong on Express Entry. Especially, I found doctors and medical practitioners and other professionals, because they think, oh yeah, well, I had to go through a whole certification process in order to make sure that I was eligible to work in Canada. I must have a certificate of qualification. So Igor's pulling up here, go to the Canadian Immigration Podcast, take a look at the certificate of qualification. I think it was a few episodes ago. It was
Yeah,
police
this
clearance
episode
certificate of qualification.
158.
So go to episode 158. You can find this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, through the Canadian Immigration Podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Take a listen to certificates of qualification, because if you are trying to qualify for federal skilled trades, you have to have a certificate of qualification or proper arranged employment. And they are very specific about what qualifies as arranged employment in order to get your foot in the door. Same thing when you're looking at PNP programs, sometimes a job offer is necessary. And then the other thing that's super important that people may not realize is that if you have proper arranged employment offers, and most of the time you also have to have a valid work permit in Canada, then you may be exempt from having to prove settlement funds. And that might be a really big deal, especially now when people's finances are going to probably be significantly affected by what's happening with global economic meltdown. So take a read of the blog article. You can search for it on our website. Take a listen to the podcast where we've been talking about express entry.
Okay. Yeah. So super important that you always stay up to date. We do have our Canadian immigration newsletter. We always struggle to keep it up to date and send it periodically, regularly, every 2 weeks, because with our busy practice, especially in this madness that's going on, we just don't have enough time to send it out. The best we can do right now is do these live streams. So again, just a reminder to everyone, for those who are new, these are the regular live Q&As. We do them every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So if you have any questions that are more generic in nature, please feel free to send them in the comment section, and we'll try our best to answer those questions. Besides the live Q&As, we, as Alicia mentioned, we do the podcasts, and we try to publish periodically our blog posts where we share our insights as to what's happening in Canadian immigration. So absolutely follow us, hit the subscribe button, enable this bell button that will send you a notification every time we go live, because it's super important that you stay up to date. All right, at this stage, Alicia, I think it's a good segue to actually go and give a few shout outs to people who tune in. And so the first comment was from Abrar, and he says, "Good day, Igor and Alicia. Can we expect 505cc in the near future?" And Alicia, unfortunately, I don't have the crystal ball here, but I think we don't even need one. What would you say?
Yeah, I saw speculation. People were talking on the chat last week that maybe the CRS would still be above 520 if they do a CEC score. I guess, Igor, you could go back to the score distribution. The interesting thing is they've not updated it, right? So we have the last draw on March 21st, and then we have the profile of people in the pool, but only as of March 16th. So they haven't updated their numbers for who's in the pool and what's happened to the CRS score. But we know that this was before they took away the 50 and 200 points. So most people, I don't think, will have the 200 points. A lot of people think that they have 200 points because they're in a managerial level, but it's literally only if your NOC, so your 5-digit National Occupation Classification Code, has to have the first 2 digits starting with 00, and not many people have that. So most people probably saw the removal of 50 points. So if you look at this score distribution, basically, some people are going to have that score knocked down by 50 points. The question is how many people? And I saw some speculation in the chat last week that maybe it's only about 20% of people who are going to have those 50 points removed. Who knows? It remains to be seen once they do a new draw and they update the pool profile. So if you take a look, maybe Igor, you can go to the previous rounds of invitations and just take a look at what our last rounds were. It was all French and PNPs. and very small PNP draws, very large French draws. And one of the reasons they might have done those large French draws is because they knew that these CRS points for job offers were being removed, and most of these French applicants, well, some of the French applicants would not have had those CRS points for job offers. So maybe they thought it was a way to clear out the system. But our last CEC draw was back in February, and the CRS required was 521.
Yeah.
And so we'll have to see. What do you think, Igor?
Well, I think the score will go down, for sure. I have an interesting insight. We have our own networking channels, and sometimes we can get some very interesting data. So I'm just going to read it from my phone because I have it right in front of me. It's just going to take a while for me to search it. But an interesting insight is that on March 19th, 2025, so 1 week before they removed the job offer points, there were 37,170 applications with job offer points in the expert entry system. So 36,150, so almost like 95, 99% of them, like 95, whatever. So 36,150 people had 50 points for the job offers, and only 1,020 people had 200 points. Okay, so approximately 15% of all candidates had job offer points. So overall, there were 153,910 profiles in the expert entry system with a CEC eligibility. So those are the people who have Canadian work experience. And of those 153,000, 33,400 people had 50 job offer points. So if we look at the distribution, right, of the candidates, if they removed 50 job offer points from 33,400 candidates, so that's, let's say, 20% of the candidates in the system overall, absolutely the score will go down.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think the score will go down significantly, Alicia. So my bet is that the score will drop under 500. And realistically, my bet is 480, 490 would be a realistic score right now. I tend to be a little more positive here. I know a lot of people are skeptical, but if you think about it, like 20% of the candidates lost their job offer points. Like the top 33,400, 35,000 actually, people no longer get the points. If you don't have a job offer points, like you have to be a superhuman to score above 500. You
Mm-hmm.
have to be under 29 years of age, you have to know French, you have to know English, you have to have 3 years of foreign work experience, education in Canada, and then 1 year at least of work experience in Canada to qualify for CC. Are there a lot of people who are so qualified? Well, there might be some people who are, but realistically, most of the people here, they are either young who came to study here on a bachelor's degree and then transitioned to master's and now on their postgrads. Yes, some of them study French, but it's just like the likelihood that we're gonna have thousands and thousands of people in that situation is very low. Um, Even if some candidates are highly skilled and know French and English and have work experience in Canada and Canadian education, those people will get swapped in a few draws only. So if you qualify for a Canadian experience class and don't fall under one of the categories, likely it's just going to take at least a couple of draws for you to get an ITA if you are in 490, 485, and so on.
Yeah, and Igor, like you're absolutely right in terms of the volume of draws, right? So when we take a look at this, you can see the the number of invitations issued really matters. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
look on the French scores, you can see, well, then when they did that last score of 379 CRS points. That's the lowest we've seen on French for a really long time. Why is that? Because they issued 7,500 nominations. And right before that, they had issued 4,500 nominations. So it's the same thing with CEC. When we look back at the last CEC draw, it was February 5th. There were 4,000 invitations that went out at a 521 CRS score. So what matters is when they do the next CEC draw, how many invitations to apply are there going to be? Because if they only did like 2,000 invitations to apply, I can see the CRS score sitting at like maybe 512 or something like that. It might still be super high because they're only taking a very small number of people in that draw. But you're right, if they do a big draw, it's going to push that CRS score down, and we'll get into the realm of people who thought that they might not have had a chance, they might have a chance now.
Yeah, because you can see sometimes they do only 400 invitations,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then sometimes they do 4,000. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the bad news is for those who don't have Canadian work experience and don't fall under one of the categories. They are the most disadvantaged. So
Yeah.
if you are outside Canada or you don't qualify for CEC, absolutely trying to get at least 6 months of work experience in one of the eligible knock codes to fit under one of the categories would be essential. If you don't fit under one of the categories and you don't meet the eligibility requirements for CEC, the likelihood of you receiving an ITA is close to zero.
Yeah, and this is a really important point. So targeted draws are in addition to minimum eligibility requirements. So if you're not meeting CEC, then that's out. So you know if you don't have a year of Canadian high skilled work experience. The other thing that I want to emphasize is self-employed. So be super careful. The other question that they're asking when they talk about do you have a job offer and do you have your work experience, there's a little check mark that says was your work experience self-employed? And if you have been in Canada, inside Canada, physically working, even if you have a work permit, if you are not an employee, if you are self employed, that does not count as Canadian high skilled work experience points. You have to say that you are self employed, and then the system will not give you the points. If you forgot to check that box and you're getting CEC eligibility when you really shouldn't have CEC eligibility, meaning you're an independent contractor or you work fee for service or you work on commission but you don't have a salary, you're not an employee and you can't claim Canadian work experience. So CEC is out. There are specific exemptions, and I'm writing an article right now for medical practitioners. And there are only specific exemptions for only 3 NOC codes for basically general practitioners, specialists, and surgeons. But otherwise, you can't claim self-employed Canadian experience. So for everybody else who doesn't meet CEC requirements, in order to get a targeted draw, you have to meet federal skilled worker or federal skilled trades eligibility, plus then you have to have the 6 months in one of those targeted NOCs within the last 3-year window. Outside Canada work experience, you can claim self-employed. So it's a different ballgame if you're looking at FSW work experience for outside Canada foreign skilled work experience.
All right, so the next question is the super chat. So Victor is saying, my CRS score is 512 with 3 years of work experience already. My profile expires on April 25th, but the actual 3 years of work experience will be gained on May 9th. If we receive an ITA before April 25th, should we recreate a profile?
And so, Victor, this is one where we always say, we ring the bell, we can't give you should you advice, right? We are lawyers. We definitely can give you advice if you book a consult. We go through your situation in detail with you because then we can understand all of the parameters and what's happening for you and your family. We cannot give advice on a YouTube live stream. We can give immigration information. And so we know, maybe Igor, you can talk about what happens with the system counting your work experience too early.
Yeah. The biggest risk is that, and I'll close the super chat for now. The biggest risk is that the system rounds up your work experience. So if, let's say, you had 2 years, 11 months, and 5 days of work experience, the system will count that as a 3 year work experience. And the risk is that if you accept an ITA, you essentially certify that you already have 3 years of work experience. And the officer may come back to you and say that you misrepresented, that you did not have work experience at that time. So the strategy that we typically suggest to our clients is to wait until the 3-year clock brings, right? Only after you actually have 3 years of work experience, then you should accept an ITA. You have, I don't remember if, is it 30 days, right? 30 days to accept an ITA. And if time permits, you should wait. And only after you hit the 3-year mark, then you should accept an ITA. The other risk that I see in your question is that if you accept an ITA but you don't submit an EAPR before your profile expires, then your profile becomes a pumpkin, right? And um, it's perhaps it might be a good strategy to think proactively, which you already do, and that's a good thing. And again, we cannot give you an individualized advice, so but you might consider recreating your profile.
Yeah, yeah. So keep in mind that the profile is only valid for 1 year from whatever date you created it. However, be very careful in terms of how you answer the questionnaire. So in order to create an express entry profile, you have to go through, answer a whole bunch of questions. And one of the questions is going to be, how many years of work experience in Canada do you have? And the key is you must be completely honest and truthful. And so you're not going to claim over 3 years if you don't yet have over 3 years on April 25th or whatever date that you create your profile. You've got to make sure that you properly answer the question. And then when you go and put your claim to work history in, you put the proper start date. So those are things to keep in mind when you are looking at what does the system do? And the reason that the system overcounts is because they don't look at the day. So if you started on March 31st, it's going to give you credit for the entire month of March. So this is what you've got to be careful of, because immigration says you have the onus to prove that you meet all the eligibility and that you meet the points that you are claiming when you apply, and also when you are granted, like when your EAPR is there, and then sometimes even when you look at the date of landing.
Yeah. All right. Before we proceed to any other questions, I'm going to give a couple of shout outs to other viewers who just said hello. So, Sarita, hello to you. We're doing well. Hope you're doing well as well. VK, our faithful follower, hello from Ottawa. I see the French points are at 75 now in the calculator. We'll talk about French in a little more detail further down the line. Alex says, hello, I'm new. My greetings from Toronto. Alex, nice to see you. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Again, we're doing these live Q&As every Wednesday. Let's see. We have a few more shoutouts. Let's see. I saw them somewhere. Yeah, Spider-Man, another faithful follower. Spidey saying hi from the former Minister Miller's district. All right. Let's see. Do we have anyone else? Okay, we have someone from Calgary. Okay, good. And then most of the other comments are the questions. So if you want to give us a shout out, please make sure you comment in the comment section and we'll pull up your hello. Oh, and then Vida says, tuning in from the gateway of the Rockies, Hinton. All right, let's go back and we'll move along with the questions as they appear. Okay, so Anand says, will the upcoming election result impact the issuance of Portal 1, Portal 2, and e-Copers? So if your application is approved, how fast you will get your confirmation of permanent residence? Do you think there will be an impact, Alicia?
Well, I mean, I guess there could be. There probably won't be for a little bit of time, because no matter what happens, so let's say it continues to be the Liberal government, probably things will continue on relatively like they have been. If it is a Conservative government, then even if they are going to make big changes, it'll probably take them a little bit of time to sort out how and when to make those changes. So probably not for the very short term, but then in the long term, we'll have to see what happens, because we know that different parties have different stances on immigration.
Yeah, and about like 2 years ago, we would think that liberals would take one pathway, conservatives would take a completely opposite pathway to how they approach immigration. And it turns out that no, like both parties are pretty much aligned in terms of the understanding that they need to reduce the immigration numbers. Speaking about this, Alicia, I wanted to pull up this article and this one is from CBC, and the same news were shared in many other media, that Canada tries to reduce the number of jobs in RCC by 3,300 over the next 3 years. And here it says it all. RCC says it needs to return to pre-pandemic spending and match lower immigration levels. So perhaps if you have less immigration officers, the processing times may go up. And again, RCC has the standard for 6-month processing for the applications, for express entry applications. Right now, if we go to processing times, I think it's at 5 months. We can actually take a look. Let me just go up here, and then economic immigration, and then let's see, Canadian experience class. It's 5 months. So they process most of the applications actually faster than what they strive for.
And maybe Igor, so Mark was just quoted in a Toronto Star article. So maybe Igor, if you want to change that, instead of CEC, go to the PNP pathway and show the difference between a PNP that is express entry linked versus a PNP that is non-express entry linked. So this is the thing that people are concerned about recently, is that if you look at PNPs that are express entry linked, so somebody will get a nomination from the province, and then those 600 points will show up in their express entry profile, and then they submit their nomination certificate and all their supporting documents, but through express entry, and it goes through express entry. Processing time, great, 6 months, like very slightly higher than the CEC, but not materially. If, however, you have received a nomination through one of the provinces, but it is non-express entry linked, guess what? The processing times are 21 months. So like much, much, much higher, magnitudes higher than what it is if you are an express entry linked system. So Mark was quoted in this article with the Toronto Star that was talking about PNPs and why there's this big discrepancy in terms of non-express entry linked PNP nominations. And we know that with the levels plan and what was happening with the provinces receiving much fewer nominations. So they literally went from about 110,000 nomination spots across the country to about 55,000 nomination spots. And that number's a little bit different because of the way they've rejigged categories, but basically they halved most provinces' allocation. And there are so many fewer spots. And so Mark and I spent a bunch of time last week talking about the changes through Alberta. We see, many of the provinces are not opening their streams, or like only in specific healthcare draws, for example. So many provinces have really put the brakes on their nominations.
Yeah, and the biggest problem with the provincial nominee programs, non-express entry applications, is that to maintain your ability to work, you have to receive this support letter from the province. And provinces are restricting in how they issue those letters. And it may take a little while, not a little while, it may take a while before you get the R204C letter and can apply for the work permit. So even if we look at the AAP draws, they specifically say your work permit has to be valid for at least 1 year if you want to receive a nomination. And that
Yeah.
significantly reduces the number of eligible candidates who have a shot through non-express entry PNP.
Yeah. Yeah, because think about it. Most of the time, you had to have come as a student, finished your diploma or degree. Most of the time, it was about 2 years. Then you get your 3-year postgrad work permit. Then you have to show that you have enough work experience working for an Alberta-based employer. For example, in Alberta or in Ontario or BC, they have requirements in terms of the size of the employer, the number of employees, and kind of the job, like how much you're getting paid for that job and the location. And then after you prove that, you have to have that employer do an employer declaration. So they have to support your work. And once you get all that, then you can submit your expression of interest, right? You get your expression of interest in there. It takes the province months to come back to you to decide whether they want you to submit an application. Then you submit an application. So all this time, the clock is ticking. And then at the end of the day, most people won't have much more. They're lucky if they still have a year on a work permit. So most people's work permits are starting to run out.
Yeah. I see that we have a few questions in the chats asking about the tax returns. We're not tax professionals, so we will not be able to give you a definite answer. But for sure, our answer would be, if you have tax-related question, reach out to a professional who works with taxes. Okay. The next question is from Meet Patel. Got police clearance certificate on 3rd of October with old passport when I renewed my passport. Then I renewed my passport. In express entry application, I provided the new passport number. So do I still need to get a new PCC as I'm only about to submit the express entry application? So the police clearance certificates, they are valid for 6 months if you are still in that country where you obtained it from. If you left the country and return back, the instructions say that you have to get a new police certificate. If, let's say, you obtained a certificate and then left the country and never returned back to that country, your certificate is indefinite in duration in terms of it will get outdated when you return back, but before you come back, it technically should be still valid. We do not trust RCC. And that's why, like, every time that someone applies with our firm, we always encourage them to get the new police certificate just to avoid any complications in the future in case the officer decides to come back and ask for a new certificate. Why would you wait for the additional documents request when you can address it preemptively?
Yeah, and in terms of the passport issue, the police certificates usually or sometimes will show what the passport number is. And if nothing else has changed, right? So go take a look at the express entry, go take a look at the section that talks about police certificates, take a look at the scenarios and the validity. Is it the country of current residence? Is it your country of residence that you had stayed in continuously for 6 months or more within the last 10 years? And take a look at the general rules. But if you have a passport and the only thing that's changed is that you got a new passport, then usually you can show, here's my old passport, here's my new passport, this is still me, the name is still the same, date of birth is still the same, it's still the same person. But Igor is right, if there is any discrepancy or doubt, it is usually safer to get a new police certificate.
Yeah. So Uzo says hello. She's also watching from Calgary, and she asks if there's any hope for CC draws. I think we've addressed that in length. So Uzo, if you turned before we talked about the CC and the overall points allocations, please make sure you restart this live stream and just take a look. All right, Sarita is saying, I'm going to send my EAPR tomorrow. What advice could you give me for this last step? Ooh, we have a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, so Sarita, we have the Express Entry Accelerator course. That's, if you can't hire us to help you go through and look at this step by step and screen by screen and all of your supporting documents, like that would be the best, right? I just think about it, Igor, in terms of if I were trying to file an application, I would want somebody to sit there and share their screen and go through and double check absolutely everything I've done, to cross-examine me, to ask questions, to try to figure out how things fit together, to tell me what they've seen that's gone wrong in the past, and then I can sleep better at night. If you can't afford to hire us to do that with you, then we do have the Express Entry Accelerator course. And so that is a very good resource as well, going through the documents, what are all the fields in your EAPR, how do you do your letters of explanation, making sure that you are not missing key elements of that application. If you're looking for free resources, we have lots and lots and lots of YouTube videos. We have podcasts on this. The other thing that you can always go check is the Express Entry Completeness Check. And so that's another thing. If you go search for A11.2 and Express Entry Completeness Check, that's kind of a little rundown of what are the minimum requirements to show a complete application.
And maybe, Alicia, I can also add here. One advice that I would give to you is when you submit an EAPR, you have to think like an officer. So be as critical as possible of your application and ask critical questions. If you have something that doesn't match, right, to your profile or your previous applications, would that raise a concern of the officer? Absolutely. Do you want to explain it preemptively? Absolutely. If you were the officer and you look at the application, you cross-reference with it with the previous applications, and you don't see something that aligns, you would absolutely have a question like why it doesn't align. And so you want to answer that question preemptively. So write a detailed letter of explanation addressing any discrepancies or ambiguity for sure. Second, make sure you cross-reference your EAPR with your previous applications. Make sure you review all of your documents. Make sure the documents align with the instructions from the RCC. We often see people submitting a reference letter that doesn't have any, like, or some elements from the RCC completeness check guidelines. Sometimes there's a missing email address on the letterhead. Sometimes there's a person would sign the letter and not provide their job title or their contact details. And those tiny little things can make or break your application. So absolutely open expert entry completeness check, go word by word, make sure that all of your documents meet the requirements. So think like an officer. That's my advice. Okay, Alicia, I propose that we move on to a couple of super chats. So Nash asked, and actually not asked, but said, the link to the Alberta Expert Entry Stream checklist on the AIP website redirects to the Rural Renewal Stream checklist instead. Could you please inform the AIP? Nash will absolutely take a look at it. We will make a note. But what you can do as well, you can send them the web form on the AIP website and let them know as well. Tejinder sent 2 super chats, but they're not tied to any question. I'll scan quickly to see if perhaps he asked the question separately somewhere. I don't see anything. Oh, actually, yes, I do. So Tejinder said, can you please tell me if I'm from India, staying in Canada for 7 years, I'm pre-diabetic and other health issues, am I eligible for H&C ground? Ooh, it's impossible for us to tell you if you are or not, because we need to know your situation as a whole, right? So the officer, when assessing the H&C application, looks at your circumstances holistically. So it's not only the medical conditions, it's the establishment in Canada, which if you spend 7 years, typically that would be a good indicator that you are established in Canada. But it's not the duration of time that you spent in the country, but the quality of that time. Did you just work and go home and watch Netflix, right? Or you actually gave back to the community? You integrated, you made many friends, you, I don't know, you got integrated into any religious community here, or you've been volunteering, right? You've been gainfully employed. What have you been doing for the past 7 years? That's the question that the officer is going to look at. The country conditions, the family considerations, the unique situation that applies specifically to you, all of that plays out a huge role in your application. So before we can actually tell you if you are eligible for the agency, the short answer, everyone is eligible, everyone can apply. But the likelihood of success greatly depends on your specific situation, and we would never recommend you applying for the agency if we don't see that the likelihood of success is more or less okay. So absolutely book a consult and have a talk with one of us. You can go to our website, holthelaw.com, and then you can choose between 25 or 50-minute consultation, during which we will discuss all of your circumstances. Understanding it all as a complex allows us to make an opinion whether you have a shot or not. And keep in mind that H&C is the measure of last resort, and it's designed for people who don't have any other pathway to immigration. And it typically, my test is like, Alicia, if I speak with a person and after the consult, I just want to have 5 minutes of calmness, and kind of like calm down my nerves a little bit, because whatever I heard during the call was so distressing. I had this ball of fluff, stuck in my throat, speaking to those people, and I was just like, man, I just wish this family or this person was allowed to stay. It would be so inhumane to send him back home. If I don't have that feeling, typically my answer is, unfortunately, agency is not for you. It's not the determinative test that applies to everyone. Sometimes there other circumstances that would still make it a strong agency application. But it's very rare. Like from about 20 consults, perhaps we take one person for the agency.
And the other thing I want to add, maybe Igor, you can go to medical and admissibility and IRCC's page on medical and admissibility, because sometimes people use the term humanitarian and compassionate in different contexts. So one thing to keep in mind is that if you have a medical condition that is going to be above the excessive demand threshold, so there are a few ways you can be medically inadmissible. Usually it's not danger to public health and safety. Usually it's excessive demand on health or social services. What happens here is IRCC takes a look and they say, well, okay, prediabetes, what are your other health conditions? Does the cost of your care cost more than the average that we spend on Canadians? And the average on Canadians is about 27,000, a little over $27,000 per year, or over a 5-year period, almost 136,000. So there will be a medical inadmissibility analysis as soon as, and you have to disclose and declare any sort of medical conditions, and that'll come up on your immigration medical as well. So the first thing is, are you medically inadmissible? And sometimes there is a way that you can put together a mitigation plan, and you can say, look, the cost of my care is actually going to come under that cost threshold, or I have private insurance and I have a plan to mitigate the costs the government has to pay so that I am paying for my own cost of care. So there's sometimes ways to deal with this before you even have to try to ask for humanitarian and compassionate relief. So you might qualify for some other economic type of application. So, take a look at medical inadmissibility. Sometimes medical inadmissibility can be overcome in a humanitarian and compassionate application for permanent residence, which is what Igor was talking about, which is a whole different kind of ball of wax. It's sometimes people need to be in Canada in order to receive certain types of medical care, and they just can't get it in their country, and they would die if they don't have it, or they have kids, and those kids. So one of the factors in an H&C is what are the best interests of the children, and sometimes officers will look at Canadian-born kids plus siblings that are maybe not Canadian-born. So there are circumstances that involve best interest of the child for sure with respect to medical inadmissibility and maybe agencies for medical reasons.
Yeah. And Alicia, as we speak about the medical stuff, I'm going to pull up the other question from Nash as well. And he asks, could you explain the medical exam exemption for an exam completed in the last 5 years? What documents need to be submitted for this? So Nash is talking about, let me just find it, medical exam.
Yeah, so Igor's going to find it here, but we're talking about express entry and medical immigration medical exams. And so take a look. There is a short-term kind of interim policy that says, look, if you had a certain medical within the last period of time, it was still valid. Take a look at all these conditions, right? Make sure that the medical didn't show that it required follow-up or you needed a new medical or you had like tuberculosis that needed surveillance or something like that. But sometimes IRCC will accept a medical as long as it meets these parameters, and you would upload a copy of that, the 1017 IMM 1017 medical form. It has your photo on it, a little barcode at the top. Upload that, give a little letter of explanation, and say, and if you need a new medical, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, and we always provide a screenshot from this page, just so that the officer knows what we're talking about. Because trust us, not all officers know exactly what's going on all fronts of immigration. Sometimes we need to remind them. And absolutely, if you meet the requirements and you think you are eligible, you can request that. With the express entry, the good thing is that they don't ask for the medical exam up front. If you ever doubt, it's always better to have it done than not and have your application returned. All right. Bruno asks, I got a postgrad work permit that was 1 month shorter in duration because of the passport expiry. But then he got an 18-month postgrad work permit extension and renewed his passport. So now that the time comes to an end, Bruno is wondering whether he can apply for another extension to recapture that 1 month.
Bruno, this is a super complex situation. We just had an interesting case. Maybe Igor, you can kind of talk in parallel without, identifying any clients or anything. But this becomes super complex, and the risk is that they're going to say, too bad, you already had the benefit of all that. The 1 month that you missed out of, you had the benefit of the public policy recapture. Well, not the it technically wasn't an extension. It was just a public policy for certain people who had post-grad work permits that were expiring within a certain period of time. Um, but the difficulty now is trying to go back and recapture that time if you had an intervening 18 months.
Yeah, I just had a consult with a client last week, and it was just one of the aspects that we discussed. And the situation was that the person applied for the postgrad work permit extension to recapture the remaining time, and it took way longer than the time that he actually wanted to recapture. And then they refused the application, saying that you spent in maintain status more than what you actually were entitled to. And so the person got a refusal, and then everything started to fall apart. So it's very risky. Likely it's not going to fly. But again, we're not here to give an individualized advice on how to act in your specific situation. All right. Okay, so let's go on to the regular questions. I think there was one more super chat. Let me just see. It was from Justin. Let me see if Justin sent any other standalone question here in the chat real quick. I don't see
And,
anything.
and
Perhaps it
while
was
you
just
look While you look for that, Igor, I can talk about
yeah.
Marlon's question here. And so I had a consult this week and actually exactly the same issue. So the GCMS notes, there's a uh, actually in the other case, there's a criminality or a security section that says a due date. And so basically, IRCC is saying they're assigning a bring forward date. So as lawyers, we used to have paper files, and you'd always have to have right on the top of the envelope, what date do we have to come back and bring this forward and take a look at it again to make sure that that has been actioned. And so now it's electronically. So basically, the IRCC officer has given themselves an internal bring forward date to say, we got to make sure to check the criminality by a year after it started, or we have to make sure to check the security by a year after we've made those requests to foreign governments or whatever the channels are that they are checking. And so just because it has a year in the future doesn't mean it's going to take that full year, but they give themselves that time before which they're going to necessarily open it up again. But hopefully it'll be before that.
Yeah. I couldn't find any question from Justin. Justin, if you wanted to ask anything, just send your question in the comments. Otherwise, I understand you just wanted to say thank you by sending us a super chat. All right, so the next question is from Vida. She asks, what if a candidate has been approved for permanent residence after being nominated by the province under the rural renewal stream and with the LMA-based work permit, should he be tied with that employer for a certain number of years after permanent residency? And I think, Alicia, what Vida is asking is the requirement that if you get a job offer point for the LMA-based work permit, the employer must provide a job offer where they confirm that they will employ you for at least 1 year. Now that Vida is a permanent resident, what happens if Vida decides to change the employer?
Yeah, and so Vita, I guess that's the question is you're approved for PR. Do you actually mean that you got your confirmation of permanent residence? Like, did you actually get a signed COPR? Or what do you mean by approved for PR? So yes, in order to claim those points, in order to be eligible for rural renewal, you have to have an employer. Employer has to meet those employer requirements for job offers in the province of Alberta. So they've signed off. They actually have had an employer declaration form that they've signed off on, and then they have that job offer. They should continue to honor their side of the bargain because that's what they told the provincial government that they would do. And that's what you've told the government that you would do as well in terms of your intention to continue to reside. If you don't have your COPR yet and you're still working on a work permit, then it's really important that you continue to work on that work permit for that employer because on the AAIP website, literally says if you have a change in your employment situation, you have a positive obligation to notify them. Also, the employer is supposed to notify them if you're no longer working for them. So it would be risky for you to quit or change your employers if you don't yet have your COPR. So these are things to think about. We're not sure, if you want specific advice, please book a consult. You can go to Holthe Immigration Law. You can click speak to a lawyer, and you can book an appointment for myself or Mark or Igor and talk to one of us about your situation so we can give you specific advice.
Yes, all right. And then we'll move on to the next question. Um, this question relates to citizenship application, and it asks whether the time spent waiting for express entry draws by some international students who were without status could be included in the calculation of the time for residency residency obligation. No, it's not residency. It's physical presence in Canada. Um, so KF, this probably would be something that we need to calculate together with you on a call. And it's not a generic question that pertains specifically to your situation, even though I understand some people would also have similar questions. So absolutely, that is something that we would want to address in a consult. Maninder says, I have not completed 1 year in my current company and I got a job offer from another company with the same knock. Will this change affect my FSW eligibility, I think? So for the FSW, you have to have 1 year of continuous work experience. And this work experience has to be in one knock code and with one employer.
So yeah, take a look, because for FSW minimum eligibility, it has to be within the last 10 years. So maybe you have other work experience that you can count within the last 10-year periods for minimum eligibility. It's difficult to try to figure out what you mean by will the change affect my federal skilled worker. I don't know if you already have a profile. I'm not sure if you're what points you're claiming, if you're talking about minimum eligibility and the selection grid, or if you're talking about CRS points as well. And is this work in Canada, outside Canada? So a few moving parts, Maninder, in terms of what that change of circumstance is going to mean for you.
Yeah. We do have a couple of questions, but they're not too clear. Let's see. So Olga's asking if tariff trade war impacts non-EE applicants who still have not gotten their FD. I'm not exactly sure what the FD stands for here. Will RCC consider alternative options or just cancel all PR applications in progress? Well, certainly nobody's going to cancel all of the applications. If you submitted your application while you were still eligible. But I'm not exactly sure, Olga, what your question relates to. Alicia, do you have any clue?
Maybe Olga means like finalized documents. I'm not sure. So You know, the government is always able to change programs depending on new government priorities, changes in the minister. They can make changes to the law. They can also make changes to policy. And this is normally what happens with express entry. So when we saw the removal, for example, of those 50 CRS points, they didn't actually have to change the immigration and refugee protection regulations. What they changed were the ministerial instructions. And so it is much easier for the immigration minister to change the ministerial instructions, because that doesn't actually have to get passed through government and become law like immigration regulations or the act would have to be done. So the ministerial instructions can be changed, and that can have really big effect. So that can change people's CRS scores hugely, or who qualifies for certain categories and who doesn't. And so that's where we might see relatively rapid changes, because it's easy to change. In terms of changes of the law entirely, that would require much more time and effort, and a legislative process that's been approved and then passed into law.
I'm going to skip a couple of questions because they are a little more specific. This one is just the example of how they specific, like the question is very specific to to an individual, right? So can I apply for the HNC because my LMA is going to expire in October? There are lots of people in your exact situation. And again, the agency assessment is based on your specific circumstances. So we unfortunately cannot answer that question until we know more details about what was going on with you and why you think you're eligible for the agency.
And maybe, Igor, you can direct people back to our Time's Up series. And so, Marion, this is exactly why we created the Time's Up series. So we have a whole series of blog articles on our website, as well as podcasts on my work permit is expiring. What do I do? What are my legal immigration options? What are the risks and benefits of those options? And I'm pretty sure, Igor, you and Mark did a podcast on the H&C and you wrote a blog article on the Time's Up series. This is my kind of kickoff Time's Up series article that's giving a broad overview of what's going on. And we know that people are running out of time and running out of status, and work permits are so hard to get. Employer specific work permits, LMIAs, are taking 10 months for a lot of people right now. So take a look at what the options are. And it is really important that people are not remaining in Canada illegally, because if you have gained Canadian work experience under valid work permits, under an LMIA, and you have a company that likes you and supports you, and you can keep an express entry profile in there, benefit from the fact that you have a leg up, that you have that CEC experience where a lot of people don't. And if you're missing out on your foreign work experience, like if you didn't actually get a full 3 years of foreign work experience before you came to Canada, sometimes it's so much more strategic and beneficial for people to go home to their home country or to any other country if you get a work visa to a different country and gain that foreign work experience, which is going to sometimes increase your CRS profile by about 30 points. And then you have maybe a really good chance at getting an express entry draw. So be super careful. Just like Igor said when we were talking about humanitarian and compassionate applications earlier, agency PR applications are like the last resort, right? It literally means there's something so unique about your circumstances that really would raise compassion in the general public or somebody who's looking at your application to say you're exempted from all the regular rules. And if it's not that, then look at what your other economic pathways might be.
Yeah. And Alicia, finally, we've got a question from Justin, who sent us 2 super chats by now. So Justin is saying, with 67 points, do I stand a fair chance of receiving a call, an invitation to apply? Is there any advice you would offer to strengthen my case, or options should I be exploring before my postgrad work permit expires? Justin, the 67 points we're talking about is the eligibility points for the Federal Skilled Worker Program. If you have 1 year of Canadian skilled work experience, you qualify for CEC and you don't have to worry about the 67 points anymore. 67 points determine if you are eligible. They don't determine what is your CRS score and what is the likelihood of your ITA. You would not even talk about ITA and your CRS score if you were not to have 67 points. So 67 points is the entry point for you to enter the pool if you don't have Canadian work experience. So having this information, it's impossible for us to tell even remotely what is the likelihood of success.
And maybe, Igor, you can go to just the general express entry webpage. And so people can see how to work through the analysis on are you eligible and what are your chances. So if you go to express entry, IRCC, and you go to express entry, immigrate through express entry, and the first section is called who can apply. And when you go to who can apply, it's going to give you 3 boxes. You've got CEC, you've got federal skilled worker. There are not very many federal skilled trades programs. So most people are going to be looking at the first box or the second box, CEC or FSW. If you click, so maybe Igor, click under federal skilled worker, then it's going to take you through an analysis, and it says the selection factor grid points. And so if you go up to the hyperlink on selection factors, these all expand. And so now we see there's language points 28, education, skilled work experience, age, arranged employment. So like I said, there's 10 points there. And then there's another 5 points for adaptability if you have arranged employment, or sometimes you have a family member. So this is where that 67 point pass mark comes out of. It's 67 points out of 100. But then, Igor, if you go back to the main page, now if you get into the pool, then you still have to check your score. So then we'd go check your score. So if you go up to the top on the right navigation bar under sections, it says check your score. And this is where IRCC has a little tool where you can do your own score calculation. The other thing that I like to bring up is the CRS check your score calculation grid. And so you can actually go into the grid points and it gives you a breakdown. So if you search for comprehensive ranking system, so CRS criteria, then it'll actually bring you to the page that breaks down here exactly how they're calculating the CRS points. So keep in mind the CRS points are on a different scale, right? So now we've got 1,200 possible CRS points. The reason that it's so high is because of the 600 points if people get a PNP nomination. But most normal human beings are below 500 points on the CRS grid. And then maybe, Igor, we can talk about French because this is, people might be confused about French. So if you look here, we have different categories, the core human capital factor points, and then it goes all the way down to those additional points. So if you look, there are 50 possible French language additional points. But there's also the ability to use language combined in your human capital. So if you go back to the core human capital factors, section A, then it gives you points for age, it gives you points for education, and it gives you points for your first official language and your second official language. So that's where people also get additional points for French. So it's not only the 50 bonus points that are up for grabs, it's also if you have French as a second language or sometimes your first language, depending on whatever is going to give you the higher score.
Yes, yes, yes. So let me just go back. Let's see, do we have any other questions that we could quickly answer before we wrap this up? Alicia, do you see any question that sticks out? Let's see, let's see. Yeah, Arjun is asking about 37,000 people with the job offer points. We've talked about that at length at the beginning of this live stream, Arjun. Yes, it will absolutely affect the CC cutoff. Well, let's see.
Yeah, and Teo is saying it's interesting because the CRS tool is now wrong and giving 75 points for French.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So that's interesting.
we'll have to calculate that. And perhaps, Alicia, as the time runs out, and we're like 20 minutes late for our weekly team call, let's finish off with this question. I made my Express Entry application, but I'm confused on what to enter on my language. Is it the raw score or the CLB? And you would always enter the scores as they appear on your language test result. So if you have taken CELPIP, it's a little bit easier because the CELPIP points are aligned with the CLB criteria. For IELTS, it's a little bit different, so enter the score as they appear on the certificate.
Yeah, and the other way that you can check that in terms of how it aligns and what points you're going to get for it is if you go back to Express Entry and you go down to the language, it'll give you a table that aligns TEF, TCF, as well as the CELPIP, Pearson, and IELTS in terms of what CLB level that's going to be.
Yeah. And a nice little comment from Arjun. Thank you guys, and thank you everyone who tuned in. Again, we'll be going live again on Wednesday next week at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. For those who have not yet subscribed, please do. If you have subscribed, make sure you hit the bell button so that you get a notification on your phone that we are now live and so that you can join us again and ask your questions. For everyone, we wish you a very productive week and good weekends ahead, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Igor.